Okay, hi Year 9. Here I have our assessment task, and this video will walk you through it. The first thing you need to know is the due date. So it's due on Tuesday, week 8, term 2. Can you pause this video right now and write that due date into your diary? Basically, there are two components of it. There's a visual representation and a persuasive letter. And the unit of work that it's based on is our Romeo and Juliet unit of work. If you can, now just flip the page to this section here. We'll come back to what we've missed, but I wanted to start with the task. What are you being asked to do? Basically, what you need to do is picture this. The Bell Shakespeare Company, the most famous Shakespeare company in Australia, is assembling its lineup of plays for 2016. That's this year, right? They're getting it ready. It is considering the value of Romeo and Juliet for a contemporary Australian youth audience. So there's our audience there, contemporary Australian youth audience. As a student who has studied the play, along with a range of popular culture texts, you've been asked to assist the Bell Shakespeare Company Board of Directors in its consideration by forwarding, that is sending it, the following: a visual text, which can be digital or hard copy, that represents your vision for a new production of the play. The form of this text will be a poster advertisement for the new production. So right away we have an audience for this and a purpose. Okay, so the audience for this section is a contemporary Australian youth audience. So can you write that in for me? Okay, and contemporary means current day. And the purpose of that, because it's an advertisement, is to persuade or convince them to see the show. So the poster that you create needs to be really appealing for Australian youth, which shouldn't be too hard because that's you. Think to yourself, well, what would I include in here that would appeal to people like me, make people like me want to see the show? Next thing you have to do is write a persuasive letter. So straight away, once again, the purpose is to persuade or convince. And for this reason, you want to use heaps of persuasive techniques, stuff that we've already done this year. Now, the audience here is slightly different. The audience is the Bell Shakespeare Company Board of Directors. And because it's them, we're going to use more formal language, and we're going to use a formal letter form. Why? Because that's our audience. That's our audience. And what are we going to do there? What's our purpose there? It's to explain the value Romeo and Juliet may have for the contemporary world and the way in which your visual text expresses this value. So your letter needs to connect to the Shakespearean play Romeo and Juliet and to your visual text. Okay, so what are the agreed conditions of this task? Firstly, obviously there's two components. There's the visual component and the written component. Very simple, the visual component must be submitted in class during the English period or to the library before this period begins, before the due date, and you receive an English assessment received stamp. The written component will be composed, that is written in class on the due date. And you'll have access to your visual component as you write. So you have it in front of you as a reference to write from. Look, computer and printer problems are not a sufficient reason for late submission. If there is a major issue, have your teacher call me or email me if that's the case. Basically, the penalties of this, 20% gone for 1 day late, 40% gone for 2 days late, and you won't get any marks if you're 3 days late. And some class time will be allocated for preparation in this task. I've highlighted a few things here just to draw them out. These are what you'll be marked on. You'll be marked firstly on how well you engage with ideas, values, and specific events and characters in the play. So I'll start by talking about that. It means you need to reference specific moments in the play. Now, our ideas and values have linked to things like conflict and love, but you want to be more specific than that. So specific things about conflict and love. You want to think of key scenes. And we've looked at a fair few, like the prologue, the opening conflict, the party scene, the balcony scene, and we will look at the final scene of the play. Next, what you need to do is evaluate. And this is a key word. It means weigh up, judge the value of. So judge the value or weigh up the merits of what? Of the relevance of these ideas to a contemporary youth audience, which is what we've been doing in class. Next, you'll be marked on how well you engage with and reference the text to support your ideas. So for that reason, we need specific examples and quotes. So we want those specific examples and quotes. Next, you need to manipulate the conventions of visual literacy, which just means you need to use the techniques of visual literacy in an effective way. And we'll talk more about that in the coming weeks. Next, in the letter, you need to explain the way the visual elements are used in your poster to represent ideas and values in the play. So, for example, you might say, in my visual poster, I have a heart torn in two as the salient point to represent the way in which conflict tears apart pure love. So can you see I have an idea? Conflict tears apart pure love. That's an idea from the play. And now I've spoken about how a visual element, the salient point of a heart being torn apart in my poster, represents that. And finally, in your letter, you have to demonstrate control of language, spelling, punctuation, and grammar. Here's the marking guidelines. Basically, that goes over what I've said. But just have a read of there and underline and highlight the key words. Here's some guidelines for preparation. Here's some guidelines for preparation. Here's some guidelines for preparation. Firstly, you need to start by identifying the key ideas you believe must be communicated to an audience watching Romeo and Juliet. I recommend that you aim for 2 ideas on conflict and 2 ideas on love. Make sure these ideas can be supported by a variety of scenes, characters, and events in the play, and figure out which of these ideas line up with which scenes, characters, and events. Next, you've got to think about what values you wish to represent in a new production of the play. So if you've got key ideas that you've seen in Romeo and Juliet, You need to think about, well, what's the value behind that I want to represent? In your visual text, you should start by looking at a range of advertising material for films and plays, and we'll do more of this in class. Think to yourself, what ways do these texts use, that is, manipulate visual elements to represent ideas and values? And then you need to create your advertising poster. You should think of the following things: colour, image, what different images are you going to use? Framing, what are you going to put around it? Text and words, font, symbolism, light and shadow, salient point, and we can add other ones like vector lines. And gaze of demand and gaze of offer. Then in class you have to write this persuasive letter. Now you want to use the basic structure of a 5-point plan or go beyond that. What that means is intro, conclusion, 3 paragraphs in between. But I think you should aim for 4 paragraphs if you can. And then you should think about addressing the following. Firstly, the overall vision you have for a new representation of Romeo and Juliet. How do you hope it grabs your audience? What picture of the world does it put forward? What values does it foreground? Next, you need to talk about why it's still relevant to a contemporary Australian youth audience. Next, you have to show the 3 or 4 ideas that you've chosen to emphasise and why you have selected these ideas with support from the play. Next, you also need to talk about the values you see as central to the play and why these values remain relevant. Next, you have to speak about textual integrity. And this is important. This is where you show how your representation is supported by the whole play, not just selected scenes, not just selected sections. You can do that by thinking about things like foreshadowing, dramatic irony, imagery, and contrast. And finally, you need to talk about the ways in which you've communicated these ideas, this vision of yours, in your visual text. You need to refer to the specific techniques that you have used. Thanks for watching.